Hey everyone, welcome back to Review Story Master, where we dive into the most gripping tales that keep you hooked from start to finish. Today, we've got an absolute roller coaster, Pregnant Wife Left in Shark Cage by Mistress, Her Comeback Ruined Billionaire. Picture this, a 42-year-old woman, thrilled about her miracle pregnancy, discovers her tech billionaire husband's steamy affair during her ultrasound call. But that's just the beginning. What starts as heartbreak spirals into a deadly trap, abandoned in a shark cage underwater on a romantic baby moon. Fighting for her life and her unborn child against a scheming mistress with a hidden agenda. From betrayal and attempted murder to uncovering massive conspiracies, financial fraud, and a phoenix-like rise to global empowerment, this 20,000-word epic is packed with twists that'll leave you gasping. Will she get revenge and ruin the billionaire? Stick around as I narrate the full story. You won't believe how it ends. The fluorescent lights of the medical center hummed overhead as Sarah Mitchell smoothed her hands over her growing belly, excitement radiating from every pore. At 42, this pregnancy felt like a miracle, a second chance at motherhood after years of trying. The ultrasound screen flickered to life, revealing the tiny form of their unborn child, and Sarah's heart swelled with pure joy. "David, can you see this?" she whispered into her phone, angling the device so her husband could witness this precious moment from his office in downtown San Francisco. "Our baby is perfect. Look at those little fingers." David Mitchell, the tech billionaire who graced the cover of Forbes just last month, appeared distracted on the video call. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled, his designer suit immaculate, but something in his steel gray eyes seemed distant. Sarah pushed down the nagging feeling that had been growing stronger with each passing week of her pregnancy. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," David replied, his voice carrying that familiar corporate tone that had become more frequent lately. "I'm sorry, but I have another call coming in. We'll celebrate when you get home." Sarah's smile faltered slightly. "But David, this is our baby's first—" The screen went black for a moment, then flickered back to life. But instead of ending the call, David's phone had somehow switched to another conversation. Sarah's blood ran cold as she heard her husband's voice, warm and intimate in a way she hadn't heard directed at her in months. "Alexis, darling, I can't wait to hold you again. Last weekend in Cabo was incredible. When can we—" The call ended abruptly, leaving Sarah staring at her reflection in the black screen. The ultrasound technician continued her work, oblivious to the devastation unfolding in the chair beside her. Sarah's hands trembled as she gripped the phone, her pregnant wife betrayed at the most vulnerable moment of her life. Rain began pelting against the medical center windows, each drop echoing the tears that now fell freely onto the ultrasound photos clutched in her shaking hands. The image of their baby, their miracle, was now stained with the salt water of her heartbreak. Sarah Mitchell had given up everything for David. 10 years ago, she had been a rising star in marketing, building campaigns for Fortune 500 companies, traveling the world, commanding respect in boardrooms. But when David's tech startup began taking off, he had asked her to step back, to be his support system, his anchor. "I need you to be my home," he had said, and Sarah, deeply in love and believing in their future together, had agreed. She had traded her corner office for a Silicon Valley mansion that felt more like a museum than a home. She had traded her professional identity for the role of the perfect wife, attending charity galas, hosting dinner parties for David's business associates, and maintaining the image of the successful billionaire's devoted partner. Now, driving through the rain-soaked streets toward their Palo Alto estate, Sarah felt the weight of those sacrificed years pressing down on her chest. The house loomed before her, all glass and steel and cold modern lines, a monument to David's success and her own disappearance. The front door opened before she could reach for her keys. David stood there, his expression unreadable, a suitcase in his hand. For a moment, Sarah wondered if she had imagined the phone call, if pregnancy hormones had made her paranoid, but the guilt written across his face told her everything she needed to know. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said, his voice lacking any warmth. About Alexis, the name tasted bitter on her tongue. David's jaw tightened. You weren't supposed to hear that. But I did. Sarah stepped into the foyer, her heels clicking against the marble floor. I heard my husband making plans with another woman while I was getting an ultrasound of our child. Our child, David, the baby we've been trying to have for 3 years. I never wanted this to happen, David said, but his words sounded rehearsed, practiced. You have to understand, Sarah, we've grown apart. You've become comfortable, predictable. The words hit her like physical blows. Comfortable, I gave up my career for you. I gave up my dreams, my identity, everything I was, to become what you needed. And now that I'm 42 and pregnant, I'm comfortable. Alexis makes me feel alive again, David continued, his voice gaining strength as if he had been waiting to say these words for months. She's young, ambitious, full of energy. She reminds me of who I used to be before. Before you married me, Sarah's voice cracked. Before you convinced me to sacrifice everything for your success, David set down his suitcase and ran his hands through his hair. I'm not the villain here. Sarah, people change. Relationships end. I'm just being honest about what I need. What you need, Sarah's voice rose, and she placed a protective hand over her belly. What about what your child needs? What about the vows you made to me? What about the life we built together? The life I built, David corrected, and Sarah felt something die inside her chest. The house, the money, the success that's all mine. You were just there. The rain outside intensified, matching the storm building in Sarah's heart. She clutched her worn copy of Eat, Pray, Love, a gift from her mother before the marriage, a reminder of the woman she used to be. The book had been her comfort during the lonely years, a promise that someday she might find herself again. I've been moving assets to secure accounts, David continued, his businessman mask sliding back into place. For tax purposes, of course, the lawyers will handle everything cleanly. Tax purposes. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. How long have you been planning this? Sarah, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. I'll make sure you're taken care of. The prenup that you insisted on, the one that leaves me with nothing if our marriage ends due to moral failure on my part. Sarah's mind was racing now, pieces clicking together. You've been planning this for months, haven't you? David's silence was answer enough. That night, alone in the master bedroom that suddenly felt cavernous, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the ultrasound photos scattered across the silk comforter. Her baby, their baby, gazed back at her from the grainy images, innocent and perfect and completely unaware of the chaos erupting in the world above. She reached for her prenatal vitamins on the nightstand, the routine comfort of caring for her growing child, but the bottle was gone. In its place was a small white envelope with her name written in elegant script. Inside, on expensive cardstock, was a single line. You'll need your strength. Sarah's hands shook as she read the note again. Alexis. The mistress had been in her home, in her bedroom, touching her things. The violation felt complete and devastating. But more than that, it felt like a threat. Who was this woman who had systematically destroyed her marriage? How long had she been watching, planning, waiting? And what did she want beyond David's money and attention? As Sarah lay awake that night, her baby kicking restlessly in her womb, she couldn't shake the feeling that the phone call had been no accident. The note was too deliberate, too calculated. This wasn't just an affair, it was something much more dangerous. Outside, the storm raged on, and Sarah Mitchell, former marketing executive, devoted wife, and soon-to-be mother, began to realize that her real fight was just beginning. The next morning brought deceptive sunshine streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Mitchell mansion. Sarah had barely slept, her mind churning with questions and her body aching from the emotional trauma of the previous day. She found herself standing in the kitchen, mechanically making coffee she wouldn't drink, when David appeared in the doorway. He looked different somehow, younger, more energetic than she had seen him in years. The realization that another woman was responsible for this transformation twisted like a knife in her chest. "Sarah," he began, his voice softer than it had been the night before. "I've been thinking all night, and I made a terrible mistake." Hope flickered in her chest despite everything. "David, I was confused, overwhelmed by the stress of the IPO and the pregnancy. I wasn't thinking clearly." He stepped closer, and Sarah caught the scent of his cologne, the same one she had bought him for their anniversary. "I want to make this right. I want to save our marriage." The husband affair with Mistress story she had feared was becoming suddenly took an unexpected turn. Sarah wanted to believe him, needed to believe him, but something in his eyes didn't quite match his words. "What about Alexis?" she asked, testing his sincerity. David's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "It's over. I ended it last night after I left here. You and the baby are my priority." Sarah searched his face for deception, but found only what appeared to be genuine remorse. "David, I've already booked us a baby moon," he interrupted, pulling out his phone to show her a confirmation email. 2 weeks in the Maldives. Just us, the ocean, and time to reconnect. We can start over. Sarah, we can be the family we were meant to be." The timing felt rushed, but Sarah's pregnant heart desperately wanted to believe in second chances. "When would we leave?" "This weekend. I've cleared my schedule completely. No work, no distractions. Just us." David moved closer, placing his hand gently on her belly. "I want to be present for this pregnancy. I want to be the husband and father you deserve." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "I want that too. But David, I need to know, who is she? Who is Alexis?" David's expression darkened slightly. "She's nobody important, a former employee who got the wrong idea about our professional relationship. I should have handled it better from the beginning." But Sarah's marketing instincts, dulled by years of domestic focus, were beginning to sharpen. Something about his explanation felt manufactured, too neat. "What's her last name?" "Chen. Alexis Chen. But Sarah, she's not worth discussing. She's in the past." That afternoon, while David was at the office, tying up loose ends for their trip, Sarah found herself doing something she hadn't done in years: investigating. A simple Google search for Alexis Chen, an influencer, revealed a world Sarah had never imagined. Alexis Chen was stunning in the way that only 28-year-old women could be, all sharp cheekbones and dewy skin, with nearly 2 million Instagram followers hanging on her every carefully curated post. Her bio read: lifestyle entrepreneur, she your wellness advocate, she living my best life, with a link to her personal website. But it was the photos that made Sarah's blood run cold. Scattered throughout Alexis's Instagram were subtle hints of a life Sarah recognized: a coffee cup from David's favorite cafe, a view from a hotel window that looked suspiciously like the one from their anniversary trip to Napa, a shadow in a mirror that looked remarkably like David's distinctive silhouette. Sarah's hands shook as she scrolled deeper into the account. The affair had been going on for months, documented in plain sight for millions to see, hidden only by the fact that Sarah had never thought to look. But more disturbing than the evidence of the affair was the timeline. The post stretched back almost a year, which meant Alexis had been in David's life long before Sarah had conceived. The pregnancy, the renewed intimacy that had led to their miracle baby, it had all been happening while David was building a relationship with another woman. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from David. "Can't wait for our fresh start. Love you." The words that should have brought comfort now felt like lies. Sarah was learning that her husband affair with Mistress had been far more extensive than she had imagined, and the implications were staggering. That evening, Sarah sat across from Dr. Rebecca Phillips, the therapist David had insisted they see before their trip. The office was warm and inviting, with soft lighting and comfortable chairs that reminded Sarah of the television show In Treatment, a program she had watched religiously during the lonely evenings when David worked late. "I want to understand what brought you both here, Doctor," Phillips said, her voice gentle but probing. David launched into a practiced explanation about work stress and communication issues, but Sarah found herself studying his face with new eyes. Everything felt performative, as if he were playing a role rather than genuinely engaging with the process. Sarah, Dr. Phillips turned to her. How are you feeling about the pregnancy? I'm scared, Sarah admitted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. I'm 42. I gave up my career, and I feel invisible. I look in the mirror and see my mother's disappointment staring back at me. I see a woman who lost herself so completely that her own husband found her replaceable. The silence that followed was deafening. David shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and Sarah realized she had said too much, revealed too much truth. Sarah, Dr. Phillips said gently, those feelings are valid. Midlife can be a challenging time, especially when major life changes coincide with identity questions. But you're not invisible. You're here, you're present, and you're carrying new life. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was disappearing, that each year of marriage had erased a little more of who she used to be. The successful marketing executive who had commanded boardrooms and built campaigns that influenced millions seemed like a character from someone else's life. After the session, as they walked to their cars, David seemed pleased with how things had gone. I think she'll be helpful, he said. We can work through this. Sarah nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She had noticed something during the session. David had checked his phone 3 times, and each time his face had lit up with the same expression she had seen that morning. The same expression that had convinced her he was sincere about their marriage. That night, Sarah did something she had never done before. She looked through David's things, not searching for evidence of the affair, which she already knew existed, but trying to understand the man she had married. In his home office, she found financial documents that made her stomach turn. David hadn't just been moving assets for tax purposes, he had been systematically hiding money from her. The prenup she had signed, trusting and in love, contained a morality clause that would leave her with almost nothing if their marriage ended due to her misconduct. But David's recent financial maneuvering suggested he was preparing for a divorce, regardless of who was at fault. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Check your car. Heart pounding. Sarah walked to the garage. At first, everything looked normal, but then she found a small GPS tracking device attached to the underside of her car's chassis. Someone had been monitoring her movements, and Sarah had a sinking feeling she knew who. As she stood in the garage, holding the device in her trembling hands, Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time it was a photo message from the same unknown number. The image showed David and Alexis in what appeared to be a jewelry store. Alexis's left hand extended as a man in a suit slipped a ring onto her finger. The engagement ring caught the light beautifully, and David's face was radiant with happiness, the same happiness Sarah had once believed was reserved for her. Below the photo was a message. The baby moon cruise was never about reconciliation. It was about elimination. Sleep well. Sarah, you'll need your strength for what's coming. Sarah sank onto the garage floor, the full weight of her situation crashing down on her. The affair was more than just a marriage-ending betrayal. It was a carefully orchestrated plan, and she was walking directly into whatever trap had been set for her. But as she sat there, surrounded by the trappings of David's success, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years: anger. Not the passive disappointment of a neglected wife, but the sharp, focused rage of a woman who had been underestimated. The marketing executive who had built her career on reading people and situations was still there, buried beneath years of domestic compliance. And that woman was beginning to see the patterns, to understand that she was dealing with something far more dangerous than a simple affair. David and Alexis had made one crucial mistake. They had assumed Sarah would be easy to dispose of. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The Maldives stretched endlessly before them, a paradise of impossibly blue water and pristine white sand that should have been the perfect backdrop for a romantic reconciliation. Sarah stood on the deck of their overwater villa, her 24-week pregnancy belly prominent against the flowing sundress David had bought her for the trip. The baby was active today, kicking and turning as if sensing the tension that had become Sarah's constant companion. "You look radiant," David said, approaching with his camera. "The pregnancy glow is real." Sarah turned to face him, studying his expression for any hint of the man who had been systematically betraying her. But David was in full charming mode, the version of himself that had made her fall in love 15 years ago. He had been attentive since they arrived, taking photos of her belly, bringing her fresh fruit, even reading pregnancy books on the beach. "I feel better than I have in months," Sarah admitted, and it was partially true. The distance from Silicon Valley, the absence of Alexis's presence, and David's focused attention had created a bubble of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. "I want to capture every moment," David said, snapping photos as Sarah posed against the railing. "Our baby should know how beautiful their mother was during this time." The words were right, the gestures perfect, but Sarah couldn't shake the memory of that engagement ring photo. She had deleted the message and pretended it never existed, desperate to believe in the possibility of healing their marriage. "I have a surprise for you," David announced over breakfast the next morning. "I've arranged for us to do something incredible today, something that will give us memories to last a lifetime." Sarah looked up from her tropical fruit salad, curious. "What kind of surprise?" "Underwater photography," David said, his eyes bright with excitement. "There's a company here that specializes in maternity photos in shark cages. Completely safe, but absolutely breathtaking. You'll be surrounded by the ocean's most magnificent creatures while celebrating our growing family." Sarah's heart skipped. "Shark cages, David. I'm 24 weeks pregnant. Is that safe?" "Completely safe," David assured her. "The photographer specializes in this exact thing. She's worked with dozens of pregnant women, and the results are stunning. Think about it, our child's first photo shoot, surrounded by the power and beauty of the ocean." The idea was undeniably appealing. Sarah had always been drawn to the ocean, and the thought of creating something beautiful and meaningful from their troubled time felt like the perfect metaphor for their marriage's potential rebirth. "If you're sure it's safe," Sarah said slowly, "then I'd love to try it." David's smile was radiant. "I knew you'd love it. The boat picks us up at noon." That morning, Sarah felt more like herself than she had in months. She video called her best friend Monica from their villa, panning the camera across the endless blue horizon. "You look happy," Monica observed, her voice carrying across the digital divide from San Francisco. "Really happy." "I am," Sarah replied, surprised by the truth of it. "I think we're going to make it through this. David's been amazing, and this trip is exactly what we needed." "I'm glad," Monica said, though Sarah caught a note of concern in her voice. "Just be careful. Okay, trust your instincts." "My instincts are telling me to give my marriage another chance," Sarah said, "to believe in the man I fell in love with." After ending the call, Sarah spent the morning preparing for the photo shoot. She had brought a flowing white dress that would look ethereal underwater, and she felt genuinely excited about creating something beautiful with David. The boat that picked them up was larger than Sarah had expected, with professional diving equipment and underwater cameras. The captain was a petite Asian woman with short black hair and an easy smile. "You must be Sarah," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm Alex, your photographer for today. I've heard so much about you." Something about the woman's grip lingered too long, and Sarah caught David exchanging a look with her that seemed oddly familiar. But before she could analyze it further, the boat was pulling away from the dock, heading toward the deep blue waters where the sharks lived. "The beauty of this experience," Alex explained as they traveled, "is that you're completely safe in the cage, but you're also completely surrounded by wild ocean life. The photos we create will be unlike anything you've ever seen." Sarah nodded, excitement building despite her nerves. The baby was kicking actively, as if sensing the adventure ahead. "Now," Alex continued, "once we get you in the cage, communication is limited. But don't worry, I'll be monitoring everything from up here. If you need anything, just signal. and we'll bring you right up. The dive site was breathtaking. With water so clear, Sarah could see the sandy bottom 40 feet below. The shark cage was lowered into the water, and Sarah felt a thrill of anticipation as she prepared to enter. "Remember," David said, helping her into the diving gear, "this is about celebrating our new beginning, our baby's first adventure." Sarah nodded, her heart full of hope and love. This was the David she had married, the man who created magical moments and pushed her to experience life fully. As the cage descended into the blue depths, Sarah felt weightless and peaceful. The ocean wrapped around her like a protective cocoon, and she could see the first sharks beginning to appear in the distance, graceful, powerful, and completely magnificent. Alex's voice crackled through the communication system. "You look absolutely stunning down there. Hold that pose while I get some shots." Sarah smiled, placing her hands on her belly and feeling the baby respond with a strong kick. This was perfect. This was the healing moment their marriage needed. But then something changed. The communication system went quiet, and Sarah noticed Alex moving around the boat in a way that seemed urgent rather than artistic. David was no longer visible at the surface, and when Sarah looked up, she saw Alex doing something to the equipment that connected her to the surface. Panic began to build in Sarah's chest as she realized she couldn't communicate with the boat above. She signaled frantically, but Alex seemed to be ignoring her. Worse, the boat appeared to be moving away from her position. Through the cage bars, Sarah could see the shark circling closer, drawn by the disturbance in the water. Her breathing became labored, fogging her mask as the reality of her situation became clear. She had been abandoned in a shark cage 40 feet underwater, with no way to communicate and no apparent rescue coming. As the minutes stretched on, Sarah's mind raced between panic and desperate hope. Surely David would realize something was wrong. Surely this was all a mistake, a malfunction that would be corrected at any moment. But as the sharks continued to circle and the boat became a distant speck on the horizon, Sarah began to understand the true scope of what was happening to her. This wasn't a romantic photo shoot gone wrong. It was attempted murder. The baby kicked frantically in her womb, and Sarah pressed her hands against her belly, trying to send calming thoughts to her unborn child. "I'm going to fight for you," she whispered into her diving mask. "I'm going to survive this, and I'm going to make sure they pay for what they've done." Just as Sarah's oxygen gauge began to show dangerously low levels, she saw a figure descending toward her cage. For a moment, hope surged through her until she realized it wasn't David coming to save her. It was Hassan, the local dive instructor from the resort, his eyes wide with concern as he approached her cage. He had been watching from shore and had seen the boat abandon its position. Hassan worked quickly to get Sarah to the surface, his strong arms supporting her as they ascended slowly to avoid decompression sickness. By the time they reached the surface, Sarah was in full labor, her body responding to the trauma with contractions that threatened to deliver her baby months too early. "Hospital," Hassan said urgently as he helped her onto his rescue boat. "We need to get you to a hospital now." But as they raced toward shore, Sarah's mind was already working beyond her immediate medical crisis. She had survived, but barely. And the woman who had called herself Alex, she knew exactly who that was now. Alexis Chen hadn't just stolen her husband. She had tried to kill her and her unborn child. The heartbreaking family drama that had begun with a simple affair had escalated to attempted murder. And Sarah realized she was fighting for far more than her marriage. She was fighting for her life and the life of her child. The shark cage had been meant to be her tomb. Instead, it had become her baptism into a war she was only beginning to understand. The sterile white walls of the Maldives hospital seemed to close in around Sarah as she lay in the emergency room bed, IV lines running into her arms and monitors beeping steadily around her. The contractions had stopped, but the doctors were keeping her under observation, worried about the stress her body had endured during the underwater ordeal. "Your baby is strong," Dr. Patel, the attending physician, told her gently. "But we need to monitor you closely for the next few days. What you experienced was extremely traumatic." Sarah nodded, her mind still reeling from the events in the shark cage. Hassan sat in the corner of the room, having refused to leave until he was certain she was stable. His presence was the only thing that made her feel safe in this moment. "Where is my husband?" Sarah asked, though she dreaded the answer. "He returned to the resort," Hassan replied, his voice tight with disapproval. "He said he needed to file a report with the authorities about the accident." Accident. The word hung in the air like a lie. Sarah knew with absolute certainty that what had happened in that shark cage was no accident. Alexis, masquerading as a photographer named Alex, had deliberately abandoned her to die. "I need to speak with the police," Sarah said, struggling to sit up. "That woman, the photographer, she tried to kill me." Dr. Patel exchanged a concerned look with Hassan. "Mrs. Mitchell, you've been through a terrible ordeal. Sometimes trauma can make us interpret events in ways that—" "She cut the communication line," Sarah insisted, her voice growing stronger. "She moved the boat away from my position. She left me to die in that cage." Hassan leaned forward. "I believe you," he said simply. "I have been diving these waters for 15 years. What I saw today was not an accident or equipment failure. It was deliberate." Before Dr. Patel could respond, David burst through the hospital room doors, his face a mask of concern that Sarah no longer trusted. "Sarah, thank God you're all right. I was terrified when I realized what happened." "Where were you?" Sarah asked, studying his face for any sign of genuine emotion. "I was on the boat when Alex realized there was a problem with the communication system. She had me radio for help while she tried to fix the equipment. By the time we realized how serious it was, Hassan was already bringing you up." The explanation sounded rehearsed, too polished. Sarah had spent years listening to David pitch investors and charm business partners, and she recognized the careful cadence of a prepared story. "I want to speak with this Alex," Sarah said. "I want to thank her for trying to help." David's expression flickered for just a moment. "Unfortunately, she had to leave for another commitment, but she was very concerned about you. She felt terrible about the equipment failure." "Equipment failure," Sarah repeated slowly. "Is that what you're calling it?" "Sarah, you're in shock. You've been through something traumatic. Let's focus on getting you and the baby healthy, and then we can worry about everything else." But Sarah's marketing instincts were fully awakened now, and she could see the manipulation in David's every word and gesture. He was managing her the way he managed a crisis in his business, controlling the narrative, limiting information, and redirecting her focus away from the truth. 2 days later, they were back in California, and Sarah's nightmare began in earnest. The midlife betrayal story she thought she understood was about to become something far more devastating. She was sitting in Monica's kitchen, finally feeling safe enough to tell her best friend what had really happened in the Maldives, when David's lawyer called. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm calling to inform you that your husband has filed for divorce. He'll be citing irreconcilable differences and requesting full custody of the unborn child based on your recent unstable behavior." Sarah nearly dropped the phone. Unstable behavior. The incident in the Maldives, where you allegedly staged a dangerous situation that could have harmed your unborn child. Mr. Mitchell has documentation of your erratic behavior and mental health concerns. "That's not what happened," Sarah said, her voice rising. "David knows that's not what happened. Mr. Mitchell has also requested that you vacate the family home within 48 hours. Your belongings will be packed and delivered to whatever address you provide." Sarah felt Monica's hand on her shoulder as the room began to spin. "I need to speak with David directly." "I'm afraid that's not possible. All communication must go through legal channels now. Mr. Mitchell is concerned about your emotional state and feels it's best for everyone involved." When Sarah hung up, she found Monica staring at her with a mixture of fury and determination. "He's isolating you," Monica said. "Classic abuser tactic. Make you seem crazy, cut off your support system, and control the narrative." "But I'm not crazy," Sarah whispered. "I know what happened in that water." "I know you do," Monica replied. "And we're going to prove it." The next morning brought fresh devastation. Sarah's phone buzzed with notifications from friends and acquaintances, all linking to the same social media posts. Alexis Chen, no longer hiding behind the photographer persona, had uploaded a series of videos to her Instagram account. The videos showed Sarah in various states of distress over the past few months. Sarah arguing with David in their driveway, Sarah crying in her car outside a restaurant, Sarah looking disheveled and wild-eyed during what appeared to be a breakdown in a parking lot. The captions were devastating. When someone you care about is struggling with mental health issues, sometimes the kindest thing is to step back and let them get help, praying for healing and peace for everyone involved. Sarah watched in horror as the comments poured in. Thousands of people she had never met discussing her mental state, her marriage, and her fitness as a mother. The videos had been edited to remove all context, making her appear unhinged and dangerous. "She's been stalking me," Sarah realized, scrolling through the footage. "She's been documenting everything, waiting for the right moment to destroy me." Monica took the phone from her shaking hands. "This is harassment. This is defamation. We can fight this." But the damage was already done. Sarah's social media accounts were flooded with comments calling her a crazy wife and questioning her ability to raise a child. The narrative that David and Alexis had carefully constructed was spreading like wildfire, and Sarah found herself living in a gone girl nightmare where the truth seemed impossible to prove. That afternoon, Sarah discovered that her bank accounts had been frozen. The credit cards in her name were canceled. The trust fund her parents had set up for her, which David had managed for years, was suddenly inaccessible. "I'm 42 years old," she told Monica, staring at the rejection notice from the ATM. "I have no independent income, no recent job experience, and no access to the money I thought was mine. He's left me with nothing." "You have me," Monica said firmly, "and you have the truth. That has to count for something." But Sarah was beginning to understand just how carefully David and Alexis had planned this destruction. Every move had been calculated to leave her powerless, broke, and discredited. The affair had been just the beginning, a distraction from the real crime they were committing. That evening, as Sarah sat in Monica's guest room, staring at her reflection in the mirror, she saw exactly what David had described: a woman who had become invisible, irrelevant, easy to dispose of. The successful marketing executive who had once commanded respect and built empires felt like a character from someone else's life. "I'm nobody," she whispered to her reflection. "I was just a placeholder until someone younger and more useful came along." For the first time since the ultrasound revelation, Sarah considered giving up entirely. The fight seemed impossible, the odds insurmountable. David had billions of dollars, an army of lawyers, and a perfectly crafted narrative that painted her as an unstable woman who had endangered her own child. But then she felt the baby kick a strong, determined movement that reminded her why she had to keep fighting. This child deserved better than to grow up believing their mother was crazy, better than to be raised by people who had tried to kill them both. As Sarah prepared for bed in Monica's guest room, she noticed something she had missed earlier. Her laptop, which David's people had packed along with her other belongings, was still logged into David's home network. And there, in the corner of the screen, was a folder labeled Alexis Project. Sarah's pulse quickened as she opened the folder. Inside were dozens of files, financial records, communication logs, and what appeared to be a detailed timeline of their relationship. But more importantly, there were contracts and payment records that suggested this entire scheme went far beyond a simple affair. David hadn't just fallen for a younger woman. He had hired her to destroy his marriage, eliminate his wife, and gain full control of his assets before an IPO that would make him one of the wealthiest men in America. Sarah's destruction hadn't been personal, it had been business. And that realization filled her with a cold fury that burned away the despair and self-doubt that had been consuming her. The affair had been a cover-up for something much bigger, and Sarah was about to discover just how deep the conspiracy went. The coffee shop in downtown Palo Alto was busy with the morning rush, but Sarah barely noticed the noise and chaos around her. She sat in a corner booth with her laptop open, surrounded by printed documents and legal pads covered in notes. For the first time in months, she felt like herself again, not the diminished housewife she had become, but the sharp, analytical marketing executive who had once built campaigns that influenced millions. The Alexis Project folder had been a goldmine of information, revealing a conspiracy that went far beyond a simple affair. David's tech company, Meridian Solutions, was preparing for an IPO that would value the company at over $50 billion. But the financial documents Sarah had discovered showed massive irregularities, money being funneled through shell companies, funds disappearing into offshore accounts, and what appeared to be systematic embezzlement from the children's charities that Meridian supposedly supported. "Are you sure about this?" Monica asked, sliding into the seat across from her. "Because if you're right, this is huge. This isn't just about your marriage anymore." Sarah looked up from her laptop, her eyes bright with determination. "I'm sure David isn't just cheating on me. He's stealing from children's charities and using Alexis to launder the money through her influencer accounts. Look at this." She turned the laptop around to show Monica a series of transactions. Alexis gets paid consulting fees from shell companies that are funded by charity donations. She then uses that money to purchase luxury goods and travel, documenting it all on social media as lifestyle content. The money gets cleaned through her business accounts and then transferred to David's offshore holdings. Monica studied the documents, her expression growing more serious. "Sarah, this is criminal. You need to take this to the FBI." "I tried," Sarah replied, frustration evident in her voice. "They want more evidence. They want proof that David knew about the charity thefts and that the money laundering was intentional rather than coincidental." "So we get more evidence," Monica said simply. "We find other victims, other people who've been hurt by this scheme." Sarah nodded, pulling out another folder. "I've been researching Alexis's background. She's done this before targeted wealthy older men, built relationships with them, and then disappeared when things got complicated. But David is different. She's not just taking his money and running. She's eliminating his wife and taking over his life completely. Because of the IPO, Monica realized, she wants to be the billionaire's wife when the stock goes public. Exactly. And she's willing to kill to get there. That afternoon, Sarah received an unexpected visitor, Dr. Rebecca Phillips. The therapist she and David had seen in their couples session stood at Monica's front door with a concerned expression. "I hope you don't mind me coming by," Dr. Phillips said. "I wanted to check on you after everything that's happened." Sarah invited her in, curious about what had prompted the visit. They sat in Monica's living room, and Dr. Phillips studied Sarah with professional concern. "I've been thinking about our session," Dr. Phillips began. "Something about David's behavior troubled me. I've been practicing for 20 years, and I've learned to recognize certain patterns." "What kind of patterns?" Sarah asked. "Manipulation, gaslighting, the way he redirected every question, controlled the narrative, and made you doubt your own perceptions. It reminded me of cases I've seen involving narcissistic personality disorder." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "You think David is a narcissist?" "I think David is a very skilled manipulator who has convinced you that your reality isn't valid. The woman I met in my office was articulate, intelligent, and completely rational. The woman being portrayed in the media is someone I don't recognize." Dr. Phillips leaned forward. "Sarah, I want you to know that I've been contacted by David's legal team. They want me to testify about your mental state during our session. I've refused, but I wanted you to know what you're up against." "What did they want you to say?" "That you exhibited signs of paranoid thinking, that you blamed David for problems that were clearly your own creation, and that you seemed emotionally unstable. They had very specific questions about your fitness as a mother." Sarah felt her anger building. "They're trying to build a case that I'm crazy." "Yes, they are. But Sarah, I want you to know that your perceptions in our session were completely valid. You were describing a marriage where you felt invisible and unvalued, and those feelings were entirely reasonable given what I was observing." After Dr. Phillips left, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't crazy, and she wasn't alone. There were people who could see through David's manipulation and recognize the truth of what was happening to her. That evening, Sarah did something she hadn't done in years. She called her old assistant from her marketing days, Jessica Martinez, who had since become a successful lawyer, specializing in corporate fraud cases. "Sarah Mitchell," Jessica said warmly, "I heard about what was happening through the grapevine. Are you okay?" "I'm fighting for my life," Sarah replied honestly, "and I think I need your help." They met the next day at Jessica's law office, and Sarah laid out everything she had discovered. Jessica listened intently, asking pointed questions and taking detailed notes. "This is bigger than just marital fraud," Jessica said finally. "If you're right about the charity embezzlement and money laundering, we're talking about federal crimes. But proving it will be difficult, especially given how they've attacked your credibility." "I know," Sarah said, "but I can't let them win. They tried to kill me. Jessica, they tried to kill my baby." "I believe you," Jessica said simply, "and I want to help. But we need to be strategic. We need to build a case that's so airtight that even David's billions can't buy his way out of it." Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah threw herself into the investigation with the same intensity she had once brought to her marketing campaigns. She tracked financial records, interviewed former employees of Meridian Solutions, and connected with other women who had been involved with David in various capacities over the years. The pattern that emerged was chilling. Sarah wasn't David's first victim, she was just the most recent. There had been others, women who had been systematically destroyed when they became inconvenient or threatening to David's interests. Maria Santos, a former Meridian accountant who had questioned some irregular financial transactions, had been fired and blacklisted from the tech industry after being accused of embezzlement. The charges were later dropped, but her career was ruined. Dr. Lisa Chen, a researcher who had been developing technology for Meridian, had been forced out of the company after David claimed she was stealing intellectual property. She had sued for wrongful termination, but settled out of court for a fraction of what her work was worth. And then there was Rebecca Kim, David's first wife, who had died in a car accident just months before David met Sarah. The official report called it a tragic accident, but Rebecca's sister had always suspected something more sinister. "They're all connected," Sarah realized during one of her late-night research sessions. "David doesn't just discard people, he destroys them, and Alexis is his weapon." Sarah's investigation was interrupted by a call from Jessica. "Sarah, we have a problem. David's team has filed for an emergency custody order. They're claiming you're a flight risk and that you're endangering the baby through your obsessive and paranoid behavior." Sarah felt the familiar panic rising in her chest. "What does that mean?" "It means we need to go to court tomorrow. They want to put you under supervised visitation and require you to undergo psychological evaluation before the baby is born." "Can they do that?" "They can try, but Sarah, we're not going to let them win. We're going to fight this with everything we have." That night, Sarah sat in Monica's guest room, her hands on her growing belly, feeling the baby's strong kicks. She had gone from being a respected professional to a discarded wife to a woman fighting for her life and her child's future. The journey had been devastating, but it had also revealed strengths she didn't know she possessed. "I'm not broken," she whispered to herself, echoing the words Dr. Phillips had helped her understand. "I'm breaking free." The next morning, Sarah walked into the courthouse with her head held high. She wore a simple black dress that flattered her pregnancy, and her hair was pulled back in a professional style that reminded her of her corporate days. She looked like what she was, a competent, intelligent woman who had been systematically undermined by people who underestimated her. The hearing was brutal. David's lawyers painted her as an unstable woman who had staged the shark cage incident, who was now obsessed with conspiracy theories, and who posed a danger to her unborn child. They presented the edited videos from Alexis's social media, testimony from paid witnesses, and a carefully crafted narrative of a woman losing her grip on reality. But Jessica was ready. She presented the financial evidence Sarah had uncovered, demonstrated the pattern of David's behavior with other women, and called Hassan from the Maldives to testify about what he had witnessed during the diving incident. "Your Honor," Jessica said in her closing argument, "this case isn't about a woman having a mental breakdown. It's about a powerful man who has systematically destroyed anyone who threatens his interests. My client isn't paranoid. She's uncovered a criminal conspiracy, and now she's being punished for it. The judge listened intently to both sides before making his ruling. Based on the evidence presented, I find no justification for the emergency custody order. Mrs. Mitchell will retain her parental rights, and the existing visitation arrangements will remain in place. Sarah nearly collapsed with relief. It was a victory, but she knew it was only the beginning. As they left the courthouse, Sarah felt a sense of momentum building. The marketing executive who had once built campaigns that changed minds and influenced behavior was fully awakened now, and she was ready to take on the biggest challenge of her career. David and Alexis had made a fatal mistake. They had pushed her too far, and now she was going to push back with everything she had learned about building narratives, controlling information, and influencing public opinion. The real battle was just beginning. The press conference was Sarah's idea, and it was brilliant in its simplicity. Standing on the steps of the San Francisco courthouse, surrounded by Jessica Martinez and several other women who had been victims of David's systematic destruction, Sarah looked every inch the successful executive she had once been. "My name is Sarah Mitchell," she began, her voice clear and strong. "6 months ago, I was a devoted wife preparing for the birth of my first child. Today, I'm a survivor of attempted murder, financial fraud, and an elaborate conspiracy designed to destroy my life." The assembled reporters hung on every word as Sarah laid out the evidence she had uncovered. She spoke with the authority of someone who had built her career on understanding how to communicate complex ideas to skeptical audiences, and the effect was electric. "David Mitchell and Alexis Chen didn't just have an affair," Sarah continued. "They orchestrated a criminal conspiracy that involved charity fraud, money laundering, and attempted murder. And they're not the only ones. There are other women, other victims, and it's time for their stories to be told." The response was immediate and overwhelming, within hours. Sarah Mitchell effect was trending on social media, and other women were coming forward with their own stories of being targeted by David's network of enablers. Sarah's phone hadn't stopped ringing since the press conference ended. Publishers wanted her story. Documentary filmmakers were interested in her case, and advocacy groups were asking her to speak at their events. The invisible woman who had felt erased by her marriage was suddenly one of the most visible people in the country. "This is incredible," Monica said, scrolling through the social media responses. "Look at this, women are sharing their own stories, talking about financial abuse, supporting each other. You've started a movement." Sarah nodded, but her focus was still on the bigger picture. "The attention is great, but what we really need is justice. David and Alexis are still out there, and they're not going to give up easily." She was right. The next morning brought devastating news. Jessica called with an update that made Sarah's blood run cold. "They're gone," Jessica said. "David and Alexis disappeared sometime last night. Private jet, offshore accounts, the whole thing. The FBI is investigating, but they had a significant head start." Sarah felt her carefully constructed hope crumbling. "What does that mean for the case?" "It means they're fugitives now. But Sarah, it also means they're admitting guilt. Innocent people don't flee the country when they're accused of crimes. But they took the evidence with them," Sarah realized. "The money, the documents, everything that could prove what they did." "Not everything," Jessica said. "We still have the financial records you discovered, Hassan's testimony, and the testimony of the other women. It's not over." But Sarah knew that without David and Alexis to face justice, her victory felt hollow. They had escaped with hundreds of millions of dollars while she was left to rebuild her life from nothing. That afternoon, Sarah sat in her new apartment, a modest one-bedroom that Monica had helped her find, staring at the ultrasound photos of her baby. The child was due in less than 3 months, and Sarah still had no idea how she was going to support them both. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "They may have escaped justice, but they didn't escape me. Check your email. A friend." Sarah's heart raced as she opened her laptop. In her inbox was a message from an encrypted email account with a single attachment, a video file labeled, "The Truth About David Mitchell." The video was a recording of David and Alexis in what appeared to be a hotel room, discussing their plans in detail. Sarah watched in amazement as they laid out their entire conspiracy, from the charity fraud to the money laundering to their plan to eliminate her in the shark cage. Phase 1 was making her fall in love with reconciliation, Alexis was saying. Phase 2 was the accident. If that hadn't worked, we would have moved to Phase 3, making her suicide look believable. "And you're sure this will work?" David asked. "I've done it before," Alexis replied casually. "Older women, especially ones who've lost their identity in marriage, are surprisingly easy to manipulate. They want to believe in second chances so badly that they'll walk into any trap you set." Sarah's hands shook as she watched the video. This was it, the evidence that would destroy them both. But who had sent it to her, and why? The answer came in a second email. "I've been tracking them for months. They're not as smart as they think they are. Use this wisely." Hass and Sarah immediately called Jessica, who confirmed that the video would be enough to secure international arrest warrants and extradition orders. The FBI was already tracing David and Alexis's location based on the metadata from the video. "They're in the Cayman Islands," Jessica reported, "and they think they're safe. But this video changes everything." 3 days later, Sarah watched on live television as David and Alexis were arrested at a luxury resort in Georgetown. The footage showed them being led away in handcuffs, their perfect facade finally crumbling. "Justice is served," Monica said, hugging Sarah as they watched the news coverage. But Sarah's relief was short-lived. That evening, she received a call from a man claiming to be David's attorney. "Mrs. Mitchell, I represent David Mitchell in his current legal difficulties. I'm calling to inform you that there may be complications with your case." "What kind of complications?" Sarah asked, her heart sinking. "New evidence has come to light that suggests your husband may have been involved in activities that go far beyond what you've discovered. Activities that could implicate you as well." Sarah felt the familiar panic rising. "That's impossible. I had nothing to do with any of this." "I'm sure that's true," the man replied smoothly. "But perception is reality in cases like this. I'd be happy to discuss ways we might resolve this situation quietly, without further damage to your reputation." Sarah hung up, her mind racing. Even from prison, David was still trying to manipulate her, still trying to control the narrative. But she was no longer the frightened housewife he had married. She was a survivor, and she knew how to fight back. The next morning, Sarah held another press conference, this time outside the federal courthouse where David and Alexis would be arraigned. "Yesterday, representatives of David Mitchell contacted me with threats and intimidation," she announced. "They want me to stay quiet, to disappear, to let them minimize the damage from their crimes. But I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to fight for every victim they've hurt, and I'm going to make sure they face the full consequences of their actions." The crowd erupted in applause, and Sarah felt the power of truth and justice flowing through her. She had found her voice, and she was never going to let anyone silence her again. As she walked away from the courthouse, Sarah felt her baby kick strongly, as if in approval. She placed her hand on her belly and smiled. "We did it, little one. We survived, and we're going to make sure no one else goes through what we went through." The phoenix had risen from the ashes of her destroyed marriage, and Sarah Mitchell was ready to change the world. The knock on Sarah's apartment door came at 3 a.m., sharp and insistent. 8 months pregnant now, she struggled to get out of bed, her heart racing with the kind of fear that had become her constant companion since David and Alexis's arrest 3 weeks earlier. "FBI, Mrs. Mitchell, we need to speak with you immediately." Sarah opened the door to find Agent Rodriguez, the lead investigator on David's case, along with 2 other agents she didn't recognize. Their expressions were grim, and Sarah knew immediately that something had gone terribly wrong. "What's happened?" she asked, wrapping her robe tighter around her swollen belly. "We've received credible intelligence that your life is in immediate danger," Agent Rodriguez said. "David Mitchell and Alexis Chen escaped from federal custody during a prisoner transport 6 hours ago. Sarah felt the world tilt around her. That's impossible. They were in maximum security. They had help, Agent Rodriguez replied. Professional help. This was planned and executed by people with significant resources and expertise. Sarah sank into her couch, the baby kicking frantically as if sensing her distress. What does this mean for me? It means they're coming for you. Our intelligence suggests they blame you for their capture and believe that eliminating you will somehow resolve their legal problems. But that's insane, Sarah protested. Killing me won't make their charges disappear. Desperate people don't think rationally, Agent Rodriguez said. We're placing you in protective custody immediately. Pack only essential items we need to move now. As Sarah threw clothes into a suitcase, her mind raced with the implications. Just when she thought she had won, just when justice seemed within reach, David and Alexis had found a way to turn the tables again. The safe house was a nondescript suburban home in Sacramento, staffed by federal marshals who assured Sarah she would be protected. But as the days passed, Sarah began to feel like a prisoner in her own life. She couldn't leave, couldn't work on her advocacy organization, couldn't even speak to Monica without supervision. How long is this going to last? She asked Agent Rodriguez during one of his daily briefings. Until we capture them, he replied. They're resourceful, Mrs. Mitchell. They had months to plan this escape, and they clearly have access to sophisticated networks. Sarah's frustration grew with each passing day. She had fought so hard to reclaim her life, to build something meaningful from the ruins of her marriage. And now she was trapped again, this time by the very people who were supposed to protect her. The first sign that something was wrong came when Sarah tried to access her bank accounts to pay for her advocacy organization's office rent. The accounts were frozen, and when she called the bank, she was told there was a federal investigation into suspicious transactions. That's impossible, Sarah told Agent Rodriguez. I've been in protective custody. I haven't made any transactions. Someone has, Agent Rodriguez replied grimly. Large sums of money have been moving through your accounts. Transactions that appear to be connected to the original money laundering scheme. Sarah felt the familiar panic rising. They're framing me. David and Alexis are making it look like I was involved in their crimes. We're investigating, Agent Rodriguez said, but Sarah could see the doubt in his eyes. In the meantime, you need to prepare for the possibility that you'll be charged. That night, Sarah lay awake in the safe house, feeling the baby move restlessly in her womb. She had sacrificed everything to expose David and Alexis, and now they were using her own victory against her. The hunter had become the hunted, and Sarah was running out of options. The next morning brought worse news. Jessica called with an update that made Sarah's blood run cold. They've issued a warrant for your arrest, Jessica said. Money laundering, conspiracy to commit fraud, and accessory to embezzlement. Sarah, they're saying you were David's partner in crime all along. That's insane, Sarah protested. I'm the one who exposed them. I'm the one who brought them to justice. I know, Jessica said, but they've manufactured evidence that's very convincing. Financial records showing payments to your personal accounts, emails with your digital signature approving transactions, even recorded phone calls that appear to be you discussing the scheme. Sarah felt the world collapsing around her. The recordings are fake. The emails are forged. They're using technology to frame me. I believe you, Jessica said, but proving it will be incredibly difficult. They've had months to prepare this frame job, and they've done it very well. As Sarah sat in the safe house, under arrest but not yet formally charged, she began to understand the full scope of what David and Alexis had planned. They hadn't just escaped from prison, they had orchestrated an elaborate scheme to destroy her completely. The media, which had once celebrated her as a symbol of resilience and justice, now turned against her with vicious efficiency. The headlines were devastating: hero or villain, Sarah Mitchell's secret partnership with billionaire husband, and the ultimate betrayal, how a pregnant woman fooled America. Sarah watched the news coverage with growing horror as expert commentators analyzed her body language, questioned her motives, and speculated about whether her entire story had been an elaborate lie. She played the victim perfectly, one pundit observed. But the financial evidence suggests she was David Mitchell's partner from the beginning. The shark cage incident, the emotional testimony, the press conferences, it was all performance art designed to throw investigators off her trail. Monica was one of the few people who still believed in Sarah's innocence, but even she was beginning to waver under the weight of the evidence. "I know you didn't do this," Monica said during one of their supervised phone calls. "But Sarah, how do you explain the financial records? How do you explain the recordings?" "They're fake," Sarah insisted. "David and Alexis have had months to plan this. They're using sophisticated technology to create false evidence. But the FBI's forensic experts have authenticated the recordings," Monica said gently. "They say your voice patterns match perfectly." Sarah felt a cold chill run down her spine. What if they're not fake? What if they're real, but taken out of context? What if David recorded our conversations over the years and edited them to make me sound guilty? It was a terrifying possibility. David had been recording their conversations for years, documenting her voice patterns, her speech rhythms, her emotional responses. With sophisticated audio editing software, he could create conversations that never happened but sounded completely authentic. "We need to find Hassan," Sarah said suddenly. "He's the only one who can prove what really happened in the shark cage. He's the only witness who saw Alexis try to kill me." But when Jessica tried to contact Hassan, she discovered that he had disappeared from his home in the Maldives. His diving school was closed, and local authorities had no information about his whereabouts. They got to him, Sarah realized. David and Alexis eliminated the only witness who could prove their guilt. As Sarah's due date approached, she found herself in an impossible situation. She was about to give birth to a child while facing federal charges that could send her to prison for the rest of her life. The baby would be born into a world where their mother was seen as a criminal, where their father was a fugitive, and where their future was completely uncertain. "I won't let them win," Sarah whispered to her unborn child during one of her darkest moments. "I don't know how, but I'm going to find a way to prove the truth." The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Rebecca Phillips, the therapist who had first recognized David's manipulative behavior, called Jessica with information that could change everything. "I've been analyzing the recorded conversations that are being used as evidence against Sarah," Dr. Phillips said. "As a trained psychologist, I can tell you with certainty that these are not authentic conversations. The emotional patterns are wrong, the speech rhythms are artificial, and the content doesn't match Sarah's psychological profile." "Can you prove it in court?" Jessica asked. "I can testify about the inconsistencies, but we need technical experts to prove the recordings are fabricated, and we need to find the original source material that was used to create them." Sarah felt a spark of hope for the first time in weeks. "David's laptop," she said, "the one I found the financial records on. If he was recording our conversations, the original files might still be there." "The laptop is in FBI custody," Jessica said, "but if we can get a court order to have it analyzed by independent experts, we might be able to prove the recordings are fake." As Sarah prepared for the legal battle of her life, she felt the baby kick strongly in her womb. The child was due any day now, and Sarah was determined to clear her name before they were born. "I'm not going to let you grow up thinking your mother was a criminal," she whispered to her belly. "I'm going to fight for you, just like I fought for myself." The phoenix that had risen from the ashes of her marriage was about to face its greatest test. But Sarah Mitchell had learned that she was stronger than she had ever imagined, and she was ready to prove it to the world. The courthouse in San Francisco was packed with media and spectators as Sarah Mitchell walked up the steps for what would be the most important day of her life. 9 months pregnant and due to give birth at any moment, she moved slowly but with determination, her hand resting protectively on her belly. "Mrs. Mitchell, are you ready to face the charges against you?" a reporter shouted. Sarah paused at the top of the steps, turning to face the cameras with the confidence she had rebuilt over the past months. "I'm ready to prove my innocence," she said simply. "I'm ready to show the world what David Mitchell and Alexis Chen really did." Inside the courtroom, Sarah took her seat at the defense table next to Jessica Martinez, who had assembled a team of forensic experts, audio specialists, and digital forensics investigators. Across the aisle, the prosecution sat with their mountain of evidence, financial records, recorded conversations, and witness testimonies that painted Sarah as David's willing accomplice. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the prosecutor began, you will hear evidence that Sarah Mitchell was not a victim of her husband's crimes, but his partner. You will hear her own voice approving illegal transactions, discussing money laundering schemes, and planning the very fraud that she now claims to have exposed. Sarah watched the jury's faces as they listened to the opening statement. She could see the doubt in their eyes, the skepticism that had been building since the evidence against her surfaced. The narrative that David and Alexis had crafted was compelling and detailed, and Sarah knew she was fighting an uphill battle. But when Jessica stood to deliver her opening statement, Sarah felt a surge of confidence. Ladies and gentlemen, you are about to witness the most sophisticated frame job in criminal history. Jessica began. David Mitchell and Alexis Chen didn't just commit fraud, they committed something far worse. They tried to destroy an innocent woman by using her own voice, her own identity, against her. Jessica walked to the evidence table and picked up David's laptop, which had been recovered from his office after his arrest. This laptop contains the key to understanding the truth. It contains thousands of hours of recordings that David Mitchell made of his wife over the course of their marriage. Recordings that were then manipulated, edited, and fabricated to create the evidence you'll hear today. The first witness was Dr. Rebecca Phillips, who testified about the inconsistencies in Sarah's recorded conversations. As a psychologist with 20 years of experience, I can tell you that these recordings do not match Sarah Mitchell's psychological profile. Dr. Phillips explained, the emotional patterns are wrong, the speech rhythms are artificial, and the content is completely inconsistent with the woman I evaluated. Can you be more specific? Jessica asked. In the recordings, Sarah appears to be calm and calculating when discussing illegal activities. But in my professional assessment, Sarah Mitchell is incapable of that kind of emotional detachment when it comes to ethical violations. She's a person who operates from a strong moral center, and her emotional responses would be completely different if she were actually engaging in criminal behavior. The prosecution tried to discredit Dr. Phillips's testimony, but her professional credentials and detailed analysis were compelling. Sarah could see the jury beginning to question the evidence they had been presented. The next witness was Dr. Michael Chen, a digital forensics expert who had analyzed the audio recordings. These recordings are sophisticated forgeries, Dr. Chen testified. They were created using advanced audio editing software that can extract phonemes, individual speech sounds from existing recordings, and recombine them to create new sentences and conversations. Can you explain how this would work? Jessica asked. Imagine you have hundreds of hours of someone's voice saying different words and phrases. With the right software, you can extract the sound of how they say money from one conversation, laundering from another, and approve from a third. You can then combine these sounds to create a sentence like, I approve of the money laundering scheme, even though the person never said those words in that combination. Dr. Chen demonstrated the process using David's laptop, showing how the original recordings of Sarah's voice had been systematically cataloged and indexed to create a database of her speech patterns. The defendant's husband recorded virtually every conversation they had over the course of their marriage, Dr. Chen explained. He then used these recordings to create a voice model that could generate realistic-sounding conversations about any topic. The courtroom was silent as the implications sank in. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she realized the full scope of David's betrayal. He hadn't just been unfaithful, he had been building a weapon to use against her for years. The prosecution fought back with their own expert witnesses, but the evidence was overwhelming. The forensic analysis showed clear signs of audio manipulation, and the technical experts confirmed that the recordings were fabrications. But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. Hassan, the dive instructor from the Maldives, walked into the courtroom under heavy federal protection. I thought they had killed you, Sarah whispered as Hassan took the stand. They tried, Hassan replied, but I've been in hiding, gathering evidence of my own. Hassan's testimony was devastating to the prosecution's case. He described in detail how Alexis had paid him to delay Sarah's rescue, how she had cut the communication lines, and how she had explicitly told him that Sarah needed to die for their plan to work. She said that once Sarah was gone, everything would be perfect. Hassan testified. She said that Sarah was the only thing standing between them and billions of dollars. But Hassan's most damaging testimony was yet to come. He pulled out a waterproof camera that he had hidden in his diving equipment on the day of the incident. "I recorded everything," he said. "The entire conversation between Alexis and the boat crew, the moment when she cut the communication lines, everything that happened that day." The video was played in court, and the jury watched in horror as Alexis Chen methodically tried to murder Sarah Mitchell. The audio was clear and undeniable, Alexis discussing how long it would take for Sarah to run out of air, how they would claim it was an equipment failure, and how David would be free to marry her once his wife was dead. "This isn't just attempted murder," Jessica argued in her closing statement. "This is a conspiracy that goes to the very heart of our justice system. David Mitchell and Alexis Chen didn't just try to kill Sarah Mitchell, they tried to destroy her reputation, her credibility, and her ability to seek justice." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning with their verdict: not guilty on all charges. Sarah collapsed in her chair as the verdict was read, her body shaking with relief and exhaustion. The baby kicked strongly, as if celebrating the victory. But the real vindication came later that day, when Agent Rodriguez called with an update on the manhunt for David and Alexis. "We found them," he said. "They were hiding in a compound in Argentina, but they got careless. They made a mistake, and we were able to track them down." "What kind of mistake?" Sarah asked. "They tried to access one of their Swiss bank accounts to fund their escape. When they did, we traced the transaction and found their location. They're being extradited to the United States tomorrow." Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction. After everything they had put her through, David and Alexis were finally going to face justice. The next morning, Sarah watched on live television as David and Alexis were led off a plane in handcuffs. David looked older, his face gaunt and his hair disheveled. Alexis appeared defiant, her chin raised as she was escorted to the waiting police car. "Justice is finally served," Monica said, sitting beside Sarah in her hospital room. Sarah had gone into labor during the night, and their baby, a healthy daughter, was sleeping peacefully in her arms. "What are you going to name her?" Monica asked. Sarah looked down at her daughter's perfect face, thinking about everything they had survived together. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope." As Sarah held her daughter, she felt the weight of the past year lifting from her shoulders. She had survived attempted murder, systematic character assassination, and a criminal conspiracy designed to destroy her life. But more than that, she had fought back and won. The phone rang, and Jessica's voice was excited on the other end. "Sarah, you need to turn on the news. There's been a development." Sarah reached for the remote and turned on the television. The breaking news banner read, "David Mitchell confesses to elaborate conspiracy." The reporter was standing outside the federal courthouse, reading from a statement. "In a shocking turn of events, billionaire David Mitchell has confessed to orchestrating an elaborate conspiracy to murder his wife and frame her for his crimes." In a written statement, Mitchell admits to years of financial fraud, attempted murder, and evidence tampering. Sarah felt her heart racing as the reporter continued. Mitchell's confession also reveals that Alexis Chen was seeking revenge for her sister, Rebecca Kim, who was Mitchell's first wife. According to the confession, Mitchell murdered Rebecca Kim in 2018 and made it look like a car accident. The truth was even more shocking than Sarah had imagined. Alexis hadn't just been a gold digger, she had been an avenging sister, seeking justice for her murdered sibling. But her quest for revenge had led her down a path of evil that had nearly destroyed an innocent woman and her unborn child. "The complex emotions I'm feeling right now are hard to describe," Sarah said to the reporters who had gathered outside the hospital. "I'm relieved that the truth is finally out, but I'm also heartbroken for Rebecca Kim and her family. No one should have to go through what we've all been through." As Sarah held her daughter and looked toward the future, She knew that her story was far from over. She had found her voice, her strength, and her purpose. The Sarah Mitchell Foundation would help other women who had been victimized by powerful men, and she would spend the rest of her life fighting for justice. The phoenix had not only risen from the ashes, she had transformed into something more powerful than she had ever imagined possible. 6 months after David and Alexis's conviction, Sarah Mitchell stood in the gleaming offices of the Sarah Mitchell Foundation, watching the San Francisco skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. Baby Hope slept peacefully in her arms, while downstairs, dozens of volunteers worked to help women escape abusive situations and rebuild their lives. The foundation has helped over 500 women in its first 6 months, Monica reported, looking up from her computer. We've got requests from advocacy groups in 12 countries asking us to expand internationally. Sarah smiled, adjusting Hope's blanket. It's incredible what we've been able to accomplish, but I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. Things feel too peaceful, too perfect. Her instincts were right. The call came that afternoon while Sarah was in a meeting with potential donors. Agent Rodriguez's voice was tense and urgent. Sarah, we have a problem. David Mitchell's business associates are not happy about the attention your foundation is bringing to their operations. We've intercepted communications suggesting they're planning to discredit you and shut down your work. Sarah felt the familiar chill of fear. What kind of business associates? International ones. The charity fraud was just the tip of the iceberg. David's company was involved in money laundering for some very dangerous people. Drug cartels, arms dealers, human traffickers. When he went down, he took their money with him. And now they want it back, Sarah realized. They want their money back, and they want the person who exposed their operation eliminated. Sarah, we're talking about people who have unlimited resources and no moral boundaries. They've already made attempts on the lives of several other witnesses in the case. Sarah looked down at Hope, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms. What do you need me to do? We need you to go into witness protection, full relocation, new identities, complete separation from your current life. I can't do that, Sarah said immediately. I have a foundation to run, women depending on me. I can't just disappear. Sarah, these people have killed federal judges, prosecutors, and entire families. They're not going to stop until you're dead. That night, Sarah sat in her apartment, surrounded by federal marshals, trying to process the magnitude of what she was facing. She had thought David's conviction would be the end of her ordeal, but it was beginning to feel like just another chapter in an endless nightmare. The first attempt on her life came 3 days later. Sarah was leaving the foundation offices when a motorcycle pulled up beside her car. The rider raised a gun, but the federal agents protecting her were ready. The gunfight lasted less than 30 seconds, but it left Sarah shaken and terrified. They're escalating, Agent Rodriguez told her afterward. This was a professional hit team, not some random criminal. They're serious about eliminating you. Sarah looked at Hope, who was crying in her car seat, traumatized by the noise and chaos. What kind of life is this for my daughter? She's going to grow up thinking the world is a violent, dangerous place. It doesn't have to be permanent, Agent Rodriguez said, but we need to take down the entire network. And to do that, we need you to testify in a federal case that's bigger than anything you've seen before. The scope of the international conspiracy was staggering. David's technology company had been a front for a global money laundering operation that involved politicians, business leaders, and criminal organizations from dozens of countries. The FBI had been building a case for years, but they needed Sarah's testimony to connect all the pieces. You're the key witness, Agent Rodriguez explained. You have access to financial records, personal communications, and inside knowledge that no one else possesses. Without your testimony, the entire case falls apart. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. And if I testify, these people will never stop trying to kill you. But if we can convict them, if we can shut down their operation, you'll be safer in the long run. It was an impossible choice. Sarah could disappear into witness protection and live a quiet, anonymous life with her daughter. Or she could fight for justice and risk everything. "I need some time to think," Sarah said. That night, as Sarah sat in her safe house holding hope, she thought about all the women who had come to her foundation seeking help. She thought about the victims of David's crimes who were still fighting for justice. She thought about the little girl sleeping in her arms, who deserved to grow up in a world where powerful people couldn't destroy innocent lives without consequences. "I'm going to testify," she told Agent Rodriguez the next morning, "but I need guarantees about my daughter's safety." "We'll protect you both," Agent Rodriguez promised, "whatever it takes." The trial was held in a specially secured federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. Sarah's testimony lasted for 3 days, during which she detailed the elaborate conspiracy that had nearly destroyed her life. She explained how David's technology company had been used to launder money for criminal organizations, how the charity fraud had been just one small part of a much larger operation, and how the attempt on her life had been ordered by people who viewed her as a threat to their billions of dollars in illegal profits. "Mrs. Mitchell," the defense attorney asked during cross-examination, "isn't it true that you have a financial incentive to testify against these defendants? Your foundation has received significant donations from people who want to see justice done?" Sarah looked directly at the jury as she answered, "My incentive is simple. I want to live long enough to see my daughter grow up. I want other women to be safe from the kind of systematic destruction that I survived. And I want the people who tried to kill me to face consequences for their actions." The trial made international headlines, and Sarah found herself at the center of a media storm that was both exhilarating and terrifying. She was hailed as a hero for her courage in testifying, but she also received death threats from supporters of the defendants. "This is bigger than I ever imagined," Sarah told Monica during one of their supervised phone calls. "I thought I was just fighting for my marriage and my child. But this case is going to change how we prosecute international financial crimes." The verdicts came after 2 weeks of deliberation, guilty on all counts for all defendants. The criminal network that had terrorized victims around the world was finally broken. Sarah felt a sense of vindication that was deeper than anything she had experienced during David's trial. She had not only survived their attempts to destroy her, she had helped bring down an entire criminal empire. But as she left the courthouse, surrounded by federal agents and reporters, Sarah knew that her real work was just beginning. The foundation had grown into an international organization, and there were thousands of women who needed help rebuilding their lives after surviving abuse and financial exploitation. "What's next for you?" a reporter asked as Sarah walked toward her car. Sarah looked down at Hope, who was now 8 months old and beginning to smile at the world around her. "We're going to continue fighting for justice. We're going to help other women find their voices and rebuild their lives. And we're going to make sure that what happened to me never happens to anyone else." As Sarah drove away from the courthouse, she felt a sense of completion that she had never experienced before. She had gone from being a victim to being a survivor to being an advocate for justice. The journey had been painful and dangerous, but it had also revealed strengths she never knew she possessed. The phoenix had not only risen from the ashes, she had become a force for change in the world, and Sarah Mitchell was just getting started. 2 years after the international conspiracy trial, Sarah Mitchell stood before the United Nations General Assembly in New York, addressing delegates from 193 countries about the global crisis of financial abuse against women. Hope, now a toddler, sat quietly in the gallery with Monica, occasionally waving at her mother on the podium. "When my husband tried to kill me in a shark cage off the coast of the Maldives," Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber, "I thought I was fighting for my life and my unborn child. I had no idea that I was actually fighting against a global network of financial predators who systematically target vulnerable women." The Sarah Mitchell Foundation had grown into a worldwide organization with offices in 30 countries. The Sarah Mitchell method had become the international standard for helping women escape financial abuse and rebuild their lives. Sarah's story had inspired legislation in dozens of countries, and she had become one of the most recognizable advocates for women's rights in the world. "We have helped over 50,000 women escape abusive situations," Sarah continued. "We have recovered over $2 billion in stolen assets, and we have proven that no one, regardless of their wealth or power, is above the law. After her speech, Sarah was approached by a young woman with dark hair and nervous eyes. She introduced herself as Maria Santos, and she had a story that sounded hauntingly familiar. "My husband is a tech billionaire," Maria said quietly. "He's been having an affair with his assistant, and I think they're planning to eliminate me. I found financial records that suggest he's been stealing from investors, and I'm scared that if I confront him, something terrible will happen." Sarah felt a chill of recognition. "Tell me about the assistant." "Her name is Elena Volkov. She's from Russia, about 25 years old, and she has this way of making my husband feel young and powerful. But there's something calculating about her, something that makes me think this isn't just a simple affair." Sarah's instincts were screaming warnings. "Have you noticed any other strange behavior changes in your husband's routine? New security measures? Unexplained travel?" "Yes," Maria said, her voice growing more urgent. "He's been moving money to offshore accounts, and he's been asking me to sign documents that I don't understand. He says it's for tax purposes, but something feels wrong." Sarah immediately called Agent Rodriguez, who was now the head of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. "We need to investigate this woman's husband immediately. I think we're looking at the same pattern that David used." The investigation revealed that Maria's husband, Victor Santos, was indeed following the same playbook that David had used. He was embezzling from his company, planning to eliminate his wife, and using his young assistant to help orchestrate the scheme. But there was something different about this case, something that made Sarah's blood run cold. Elena Volkov wasn't just another gold digger. She was a professional assassin who specialized in targeting wealthy women. "She's done this before," Agent Rodriguez told Sarah during their briefing. "At least 6 times in the past 5 years. She gets hired by wealthy men who want to eliminate their wives, seduces them, helps them commit financial crimes, and then eliminates the wives in ways that look like accidents." Sarah realized that she had stumbled onto something much bigger than a single case of domestic abuse. There was an organized network of professional killers who specialized in helping wealthy men dispose of their wives. "We need to shut this down," Sarah said. "How many other women are in danger right now?" The investigation expanded rapidly, revealing a global network of assassins, corrupt lawyers, and financial experts who provided divorce services to wealthy men who wanted to eliminate their wives rather than share their assets. The network had been operating for over a decade, and they had successfully eliminated dozens of women whose deaths had been written off as accidents or suicides. Sarah's foundation worked with law enforcement agencies around the world to identify potential victims and gather evidence against the network. It was dangerous work. Several of the investigators were targeted for assassination, but Sarah felt a sense of purpose that was even stronger than what she had felt during her own case. "This isn't just about revenge," she told Monica during one of their planning sessions. "This is about preventing other women from going through what I went through. This is about making sure that being married to a wealthy man doesn't become a death sentence." The breakthrough came when Elena Volkov was arrested in Switzerland while preparing to eliminate another wealthy wife. Under interrogation, she revealed the full scope of the network and provided evidence that led to arrests in 12 countries. "She's agreed to testify against her handlers," Agent Rodriguez reported. "In exchange for a reduced sentence, she's willing to provide evidence that will destroy the entire network." Sarah felt a sense of vindication that was even deeper than what she had experienced during David's trial. She had not only survived an attempt on her life, she had helped uncover and destroy a global conspiracy that had killed dozens of innocent women. But as Sarah prepared for the upcoming trials, she received an unexpected visitor. A young woman in her early 20s knocked on her office door, introducing herself as Rebecca Chen. "I'm Alexis Chen's daughter," the young woman said. "I know what my mother did to you, and I'm here to apologize." Sarah felt her heart racing. "Your mother tried to kill me." "I know," Rebecca said, tears streaming down her face. "But you need to understand she wasn't always like that. She was seeking revenge for her sister's death, and it consumed her. It turned her into something evil." Sarah studied the young woman's face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. What do you want from me? I want to help, Rebecca said. I want to work for your foundation. I want to help other women avoid the fate that my mother and your husband tried to impose on you. Sarah felt a surge of conflicting emotions. This was the daughter of the woman who had tried to murder her. But she was also a young woman who seemed genuinely committed to making amends for her mother's crimes. I need to think about this, Sarah said. That night, Sarah sat in her apartment with Hope, who was now walking and beginning to say her first words. As she watched her daughter play, Sarah thought about the cycles of violence and revenge that had dominated her life for the past few years. What do you think, baby? Sarah asked Hope. Should we give her a chance to make things right? Hope looked up at her mother and smiled, reaching out with her small hands. Mama, she said clearly. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. Her daughter's first clear word was a reminder of what really mattered, not revenge or punishment, but love and the hope for a better future. The next morning, Sarah called Rebecca Chen. I'm willing to give you a chance, she said, but you need to understand that trust is earned, not given. I understand, Rebecca said. I'm ready to work for it. As Sarah hung up the phone, she felt a sense of completeness that she had never experienced before. She had gone from being a victim to being a survivor to being an advocate for justice. She had built a global organization that helped thousands of women, and she had helped destroy criminal networks that had terrorized victims around the world. But more than that, she had found a way to break the cycle of violence and revenge that had consumed so many lives. By offering Rebecca Chen a chance at redemption, Sarah was choosing hope over hatred, forgiveness over revenge. The phoenix had not only risen from the ashes, she had become a beacon of hope for women around the world, and Sarah Mitchell's story was far from over. As she looked out at the San Francisco skyline, holding hope in her arms, Sarah knew that her greatest achievements were still ahead of her. The foundation would continue to grow. More women would be saved, and the world would become a safer place for future generations. The legend of Sarah Mitchell was just beginning, and the impact of her courage would be felt for generations to come. But as Sarah prepared for bed that night, she received a text message from an unknown number. The game is far from over. Some legacies are worth dying for. A friend of the family. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she realized that her story was about to take another unexpected turn. The enemies she had defeated had left behind others who were determined to continue their work. But Sarah Mitchell was no longer the frightened housewife who had discovered her husband's affair during an ultrasound appointment. She was a warrior who had survived assassination attempts, criminal conspiracies, and international terrorism. She was a woman who had found her voice and her purpose, and she was ready for whatever came next. The phoenix had risen from the ashes, and nothing would ever bring her down again. First three, Epilogue: The Sarah Mitchell Effect. 5 years after the shark cage incident that nearly killed her, Sarah Mitchell addressed the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. The audience was filled with the world's most powerful business leaders, politicians, and philanthropists, all gathered to hear from the woman who had changed how the world understood financial abuse. When I was abandoned in that shark cage, Sarah concluded her speech, I thought I was fighting for my life. I had no idea that I was actually fighting for the lives of thousands of women who would come after me. The Sarah Mitchell Foundation has now helped over 100,000 women worldwide escape financial abuse and rebuild their lives. The standing ovation lasted for 5 minutes. As Sarah left the stage, she was approached by countless world leaders who wanted to discuss expanding the foundation's work in their countries. But the moment that meant the most to Sarah came when Hope, now 5 years old, ran up to her after the speech and hugged her tightly. Mama, you're famous, Hope said, her eyes bright with excitement. Sarah knelt down to her daughter's level. No, baby, I'm not famous. I'm just a woman who refused to give up. And someday, when you're older, you'll understand that the most important thing in life is never giving up on yourself or on the people you love. As they walked hand in hand through the streets of Davos, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had gone from being a victim of domestic abuse to becoming one of the most powerful advocates for women's rights in the world. The shark cage that was meant to be her tomb had become her rebirth. The conspiracy that was meant to destroy her had become the foundation for a global movement. And the daughter she had feared would grow up without a mother had become the inspiration for everything Sarah did. The phoenix had not only risen from the ashes, she had become a symbol of hope for women everywhere. And Sarah Mitchell's legacy would live on for generations to come. But as they walked through the Swiss evening, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message that made her blood run cold. Distance means nothing when someone lives in your heart. See you soon. Sarah. Elena. Sarah looked down at Hope, who was chattering excitedly about the day's events, and realized that her greatest challenges were still ahead of her. The enemies she had defeated had taught others to hate her, and the cycle of violence was beginning again. But Sarah Mitchell was ready. She had learned that she was stronger than she had ever imagined, and she would never again be the victim of someone else's evil. The legend of Sarah Mitchell was just beginning, and the world would never be the same.